Yo, welcome back to another video. It's your boy Corey, man. This is, let me read the title real quick. This is why exactly does Spider-Man suck in Marvel's Avengers? It's not Marvel's Spider-Man, this is Marvel's Avengers, y'all. Just in case y'all like, I'm saying the Marvel's Spider-Man game sucks. It's great. I played Marvel's Avengers. It's cool. There's some nice moments. I love playing with friends. They had a lot of cosmetics. Some of them I paid for it. The rest I waited until they just offered everything up for free. So if you pay for it, well, that's what they said. You can have them for free.
Since the release of Marvel's Avengers. Isn't that crazy? It's also crazy that they made Spider-Man a PlayStation exclusive character, and basically everyone agrees that he sucks, with the general consensus being that he feels like Insomniac's rendition of the character, but worse. Which is true, but what does that really mean? Why exactly does Spider-Man suck in Avengers? This entire video will be comparing Avengers Spidey to the Insomniac version, specifically from the original 2018 game. I know that this may seem like an unfair comparison to make, for several reasons. Insomniac focused all their attention on one main playable character, while Avengers had to spread work and focus across multiple different superheroes. Additionally, Spider-Man 2018 and Avengers are two completely different types of games. A single-player open-world action game with a linear campaign versus a multiplayer gear-based game with heavy focus on build crafting. And yeah, all of this is true. These are different games with different focuses. However, Spider-Man in Avengers is so remarkably similar to Insomniac's rendition of the character that it's impossible not to compare them. While Spider-Man has been in a ton of other video games before, and there are of course similarities between those different titles, none of them are as directly similar to Insomniac's work as this is. Especially because Avengers Spider-Man is so different from all the other characters in the game that it genuinely feels like they adapted Insomniac's work instead of taking their own stab at him, more in line with what the other characters are capable of. There's a lot of similarities here and there, but the biggest and clearest ones are: Number 1, Spider-Man cannot block or parry. He's the only character in Avengers who can't do this, and it's because, number 2, the block button, R2, is instead used for swinging, just like in the Insomniac game. No other hero in Avengers uses R2 as their main method of traversal. And number 3, Spider-Man can do a takedown on enemies by sacrificing a full bar of intrinsic meter. This works completely differently to the intrinsic meters of all other characters in Avengers, and that's because they've turned it into a ghetto version of Insomniac's focus meter. These three things together feel to me like a pretty blatant attempt to recreate Insomniac's work. I won't be discussing Spider-Man's gear here. I made another video discussing the character's gameplay in Avengers, and I got a handful of comments saying, "But you didn't talk about the max level 175 gear though!" And like, look, I get it. Gear is a fundamental part of this game, but I do not care. What I care about is how well Spider-Man's abilities have been translated into gameplay. If the gear actually made meaningful changes that mattered more often than not, then I would think differently, but it doesn't. So once again, we will not be discussing gear in this video, except for one little exception we'll get to later. Now, with all these disclaimers out of the way, what are the problems with this version of the character? The two main areas this Spider-Man lacks in are in visual presentation and game feel. And sound design, but that's a problem across Avengers as a whole. Still, it's much more noticeable with Spider-Man because of how you can compare him to the Insomniac game. Like, listen to the sound effects of his basic attack combo. It doesn't even sound like he's hitting them. Also, peep the sound effect that plays when you charge his web shot.
That doesn't sound good.
Ugh. Let's start with Spider-Man's presentation, the visual component. And I'm not talking about the design of his suits, I've made a video on that already. I'm talking about two main things here, the quality of his animations and his speed, or lack thereof. These two problems are purely visual, but they still have an effect on how you perceive the character and how it feels to play him. Even if he did control well, which he doesn't, you'd still notice how awkward his motions are, which would bring down your enjoyment while playing and make you feel decidedly less cool. And I think a lot of people are immediately going to think of the web swinging. Yeah, it's bad. Everyone knows it's bad. It's basically the only thing people know about Avengers' version of Spider-Man. It's slow, it looks awkward, we all know. Everyone knows this already. I'm not going to talk about it. But that wall crawling though. His wall crawling looks horrible. He moves his whole body around like a snake and it's so gross. I don't even have to compare it to the Insomniac game. I feel like any Spider-Man game has wall crawling that looks better than this. Wall crawling is one of the most basic, essential components of Spider-Man and they completely bungled it. When it comes to his basic ground movement, Avengers falls incredibly short of Insomniac's work. This is mostly due to how Insomniac created two different movement states for the character, resting and combat. When resting, or out of combat, Spider-Man stands and moves more normally, but when in combat, he assumes a combat pose, lower to the ground, and his walk/run animations change to a more ninja-like movement. Avengers Spider-Man has both a resting and combat pose, but no combat movement, so he'll transition from his lower to the ground combat pose to his fully upright running animation, which looks kinda weird. Even the animation for Avengers' idle pose is a little weak. Insomniac Man is actually striking a heroic pose, while in Avengers he's just sort of standing there. His combat pose could use some improvement too, and I find it really weird how his back muscles pinch together when he does this. Like that can't be normal. When Spider-Man's gameplay was first shown off, something people latched onto immediately was how awful his web shooting animation was. I even made a post about it on the Spider-Man PS4 subreddit that got over 1,000 upvotes, and then was removed with no reason given. Yes, I'm still mad about that. The animation itself was pretty bad, but it was the horrendously awkward pose he took when aiming that made it hard to look at. Both the aiming pose and web shooting animation were actually changed at some point, and it's significantly less embarrassing to look at. I say at some point because I'm not actually sure when they changed it. Trust me, I looked. Keep in mind that Spider-Man released November 30th of 2021. On Reddit, the only post I could find commenting on this animation change was a post from March 31st, 2022. However, I remember seeing that post when it was first posted and already being aware of the animation being changed, so I think it was changed before that, but I can't find evidence of exactly when. I went through every patch note for the month of March 2022, and none of them mentioned changing this animation. What's really funny though is that if you look closely at his reload animation, then you can tell that after reloading he assumes the original web shooting pose before correcting himself and returning to the new one. While they did fix how the web shooting looks, they didn't address how slow it is, because the fire rate is pretty slow. Compared to the Insomniac version, Avengers Spidey fires half as fast, but that's not the only thing that's slow about the web shooting. There's a charge shot you can do that takes pretty long to charge. I compared it to Iron Man's charge shot, and Spidey's takes longer to charge. But there's also a silly spin animation he does before firing that makes this action take even longer. Once again, comparing this to Iron Man, he just shoots it out. He doesn't waste time doing some dumb little spin move. So between the longer charge time and longer wind up on the shot itself, this move is slow even compared to other characters in this game. Looking at his other combat animations, and I need to stress we are still only looking at their animations and not their functionality, they're not great either. Avengers Spider-Man has a 7-hit basic attack combo, while Insomniac's was only 4 hits, so it takes longer to achieve essentially the same thing. Because of that, Avengers Spidey feels slower despite moving at about the same speed. Something similar can be said about the air combo. These are the same amount of hits, 4, and both Spider-Men move at about the same speed for the first 3 hits. But then, Avengers Spidey does this slow little spin before his last kick, making the final hit come out way later than Insomniac's. It's not a huge thing I guess, but again, it makes him feel a lot slower. Spider-Man's ground pound in this game looks stupid. There's no eloquent way to say that. I mean, just look at it. What is this? What is this YMCA looking pose? This pose is actually the image used for the skill in the skill tree, so the devs were clearly proud of it, but I don't get why. This isn't a combat pose, this looks more like a dance pose or something. It's just so silly. In the Insomniac game, Spider-Man had an ability called the Web Blossom. It was a suit power, in other words a super move, that would nuke the surrounding area with webs as Spider-Man spun around dramatically. In Avengers, Spider-Man has a similar move called the Web Repeater. You might think that it would be one of his heroic abilities, which are the super moves of this game given how powerful it was in Insomniac's title. But no, it's actually a combo finisher, performed by pressing triangle for the last hit of the light attack combo. Since it's not a super move like it was in the Insomniac game, it's understandable that it isn't as powerful and impressive as it was there. But come on, it's so slow and awkward. Avengers is way more realistic here, but when it comes to animation, that's not always a good thing. Insomniac's animation is incredibly exaggerated. Seriously, pause and look at him as he's doing this, and you'll see that he does some pretty impossible poses. Between that, the higher movement speed, and the much higher density of webs being shot out in more directions, the animation looks way more powerful. Again, I know that this is comparing a super move to a combo finisher, so it's not the most fair comparison. That being said, why isn't this a super move in Avengers? All the characters in Avengers have 3. Spider-Man's are a drone, a web bomb, and a web wrecking ball. So looking at his more offense-focused ones, the web bomb and wrecking ball, one of them hurls a ball that explodes with web, and the other one hurls a ball that explodes with web. I mean, really? You couldn't replace one of these with the Web Blossom? And yeah, I know that Web Blossom also spreads web like an explosion, but at least it's visually distinct from these other 2 options. For the last examination of the visuals, I want to look at a specific takedown animation, the one called Don't Knock the Classic. I'd say that Spider-Man's takedowns in Avengers are generally pretty slow and awkward looking, but this one in particular is very similar to one from Insomniac, so we can make a direct comparison between the 2. Both animations have Spider-Man pull a guy towards him, then do a spin kick to take him down. The basics are the same, but they differ wildly in their subtleties and execution. In Avengers, he pulls the guy to the ground, and then spins around to kick him as the goon is picking himself up. Why? Spider-Man starts the windup of his kick before the guy even gets up. So he knew that he would get up? Then why drag him to the ground in the first place? The enemy also picks himself up really quick, too quick for how hard he got yanked. In the Insomniac game, Spider-Man pulls the goon directly to him and kicks, which is simpler and makes more sense. Also, Avengers Spider-Man lands on his feet after his kick, while Insomniac Spider-Man has to stop himself from falling by using one of his hands to land on the ground. This makes Insomniac Spidey look like he really put his back into that kick, selling the impact of the attack. In comparison, Avengers Spidey looks like he performed a light dance move. Overall, I'd say that Avengers Spider-Man is not animated well, and what I mean when I say that is that his movements do not properly convey the power and agility inherent to Spider-Man. Lacking in both the super and spidery departments, this version of the character moves around too much like a normal human being. His lack of speed is somewhat understandable given the general sluggishness of Avengers, but Spider-Man is a character known for his speed, so this is still a problem, especially when he can be slow even compared to other characters in the game. That's it for the visual component of this Spider-Man. Now let's discuss how it feels to actually play him. If you asked me to describe how Spider-Man feels to control an Avengers with only one word, my answer would be rigid. I'm sure others would go with clunky, and I wouldn't disagree, but rigid really is the word that I think best encapsulates this version of the character. It really feels like you can only play him in a certain way and only do certain things. The fluidity and flexibility that defined Insomniac's take on the character are absent here. Despite having many of the same tools, you can't link them together satisfyingly, or in some cases, you can't link them together at all. Again, rigid. Despite being the only character in the game who can do air takedowns, Spider-Man can't do a takedown if he is in the air, but the enemy is on the ground. This isn't the biggest issue in the world, as usually trying to do a takedown on a grounded enemy while airborne will result in the game letting Spider-Man drop down to the ground and then perform the takedown, so not a huge problem, but it does feel awkward and deprives you of an option the Insomniac version was capable of. The web strike is entirely
Ah, I'm gonna get out of here. I almost got on this one.